The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
People have been killed and 42 wounded this morning at two attacks in Iran. One at the National Parliament, one at Ayatollah Khomeini's tomb. And the Islamic State immediately claimed responsibility. If true, this would be the first attack by ISIS inside of Iran. Consider that just 2 days ago, Iran put out a statement in response to the London terror attacks of this past weekend, talking about how the West should stop taking money from those who fund terror, hinting at Saudi Arabia. Not to be conspiratorial, but it's hard not to notice that Iran criticizes the West and Saudi involvement in terrorism, and then this happens. And by the way, almost immediately, the Islamic State releasing a graphic video showing a bloodied man lying on the ground in the parliament while a gunman in the background shouts, "Thank God. Do you think we're going to leave? We will remain here, God willing." Suspicions in Iran are pointing to Saudi Arabia, though. There was a tweet put out earlier today indicating that Iran is straight up blaming Saudi Arabia for this attack. If that is going to be the direction, Pat, this really has the potential for significant, potentially violent escalation between Middle Eastern Muslim majority countries.
Yeah, especially now because ISIS is losing ground when it comes to Raqqa and Mosul. And as they continue to have less land and have less legitimacy in establishing a caliphate, you're going to imagine that they're going to amp up these attacks, perhaps out of anger?
More erratic behavior, I would certainly assume. And recall that there are complex dynamics at play here. Iran supports the Assad government in their fight against ISIS in Syria, a brutal regime, no doubt, that Iran is supporting. And it can be really easy to look at the region from the U.S. and say, oh, ISIS, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, all similar with the same allegiances, worldview, and loyalties. The reality is not at all that, and infinitely more complex. That being said, Hamidreza Taraghi, a hardline analyst with ties to Iran's supreme leader, said, quote, "ISIS ideologically, financially, and logistically is fully supported and sponsored by Saudi Arabia." And this is actually an issue of contention. We've talked about how, on the one hand, ISIS and Saudi Arabia are at odds organizationally, but that they both subscribe to different but similar worldviews in terms of being some of the most radical flavors of Islam that are out there. So this is something that is only starting to ramp up.
But then, of course, the attack on Iran makes a little bit more sense because, of course, Iran is predominantly Shia.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And lots of the calling cards of recent ISIS attacks hitting more than one location, close to simultaneously, attackers having suicide vests. Those vests aren't always real. 6 attackers were killed, 4 at the parliament, 2 at the Ayatollah's tomb. These are the first terror attacks in Iran in more than a decade. And Iran historically has been both a victim of and sponsor of radical terrorism. Iran widely considered to have been behind the attacks in my home city of Buenos Aires in Argentina of a Jewish organization, the AMIA, near where my grandparents on my mom's side actually lived at the time. So significant possibility of escalation in the region. A tweet this morning at 10:46 a.m. Eastern saying, just in, Iran's Revolutionary Guards say Saudi Arabia was behind deadly attacks in Tehran. This could escalate, and it could escalate quickly, and we are going to be paying attention to it. On the show, we've been following what's been going on with net neutrality at the FCC, and it's hard to think of, in addition to healthcare, an issue that touches more aspects of our day-to-day lives in so many ways every single day than internet freedom and net neutrality. And I've told you about the new FCC chairman appointed by the president, Ajit Pai, who has vowed to undo really important regulations from 2 years ago protecting net neutrality. This includes a rule that would classify internet service providers as public utilities, really important thing under Title II of the Telecommunications Act and require them to be regulated as public utilities. This prevents actions such as internet service providers choosing to slow down certain connection speeds for certain websites and certain services if maybe it benefits them financially. Many people, probably most people, I would say, don't live in areas with much or any competition as far as internet service providers are concerned. So if these regulations are removed, many people will have no choice but to either have their internet access manipulated by the one carrier in town if you want internet at all, or to not have internet at home. We've talked about how big internet service providers like Comcast have been publishing propaganda in support of the removal of these net neutrality rules, because net neutrality would mean more regulations for them and potentially lower profits. But many internet content providers are now rallying behind net neutrality, and they're opposing the elimination of these regulations, and that's a really good thing. There's been a national day of action planned in support of keeping open internet rules intact, and many web-based companies are planning to support and participate in it. Among these companies are Amazon, Etsy, Kickstarter, Mozilla, Reddit, Vimeo. More companies are expected to join. Michael Chea, Vimeo's head lawyer, said, quote, "Net neutrality made it possible for Vimeo, along with countless other startups, to innovate and thrive. The FCC's proposed rollback of the 2015 open internet rules threatens to impede that innovation and allow a handful of incumbent ISPs to determine winners and losers. It's being backed by the ACLU, by the Center for Media Justice, by Greenpeace, by MoveOn.org. This actually matters, and it has worked. There was a similar day of protest, you might recall, in 2014, and it was backed by internet content providers, not service providers, and it helped give us the current net neutrality regulations, which are, by the way, in danger now. That's what we're talking about. So we can actually say with some confidence, Pat, that when the population of the U.S. mobilizes around a movement like this, it can actually have an impact.
It's also very interesting, too, how you don't really know which content providers would stand to benefit if net neutrality was kept in place or eliminated.
Sure.
I mean, you'd have to imagine there's a PR angle. Maybe they're part of some other corporate conglomerate that also includes telecom companies. But established companies like Amazon, you wouldn't think they would necessarily want to keep net neutrality because, as the guy from Vimeo said, it allows smaller companies to compete. Yeah, so it's not a foregone conclusion that the companies I listed, Amazon, Etsy, etc., would necessarily be behind this. And case in point, Netflix, I believe, I'm just thinking about this now, we can fact check it after. I believe Netflix at one point was much more vocally in favor of net neutrality, and they're not against it now, but they're sort of like not really getting too involved in it at this point. You know, even on the first layer, if it costs them some money, from the PR perspective, it helps them a great deal. And you have a fox watching the hen house here. Ajit Pai, who now runs the FCC, appointed by Trump, is a former Verizon lawyer. That's why it's especially important that people become engaged in this. And when John Oliver's episode about net neutrality and recently the sending comments to the FCC aired, it crashed the FCC website due to traffic. The FCC said that 5 million comments have been filed on the matter, at least partially connected to that story that John Oliver did. It was also great just to see him humiliate Ajit Pai and have that Reese's mug that was much bigger than the one he has. Reese's. That's another one we're putting on the list of interesting pronunciations from Pat. I know a lot of people who say Reese's. Reese's peanut butter cups? Reese's or Reese's. It's about the same thing. Well, you know, it's tomato, I guess we could call it. So there haven't been that many announcements about exactly what will happen on July 12th, this day of action. But all of these supporting internet content providers are going to have some kind of messaging on that day, similar to the SOPA blackout in 2012. I really am disappointed that this has become a partisan issue when you think about all of the implications. A small number of big companies have effectively an oligopoly on something as essential as internet infrastructure, and we're opening the door to them being able to choose which websites can you visit at normal speed and which websites can you visit at a lesser speed, and how well you're able to access what and when based on financial interest and business relationships. And a lot of what Donald Trump and his appointees are tackling only has an upside for big corporations and their executives, not people. But yet, if Trump's name is on it, you will have Trumpists that support it, even if it's not good for them. Yeah, I think the financial interest is part of the reason why this will never be a settled issue. It's kind of like a hydra that keeps coming back in different forms every few years.
Nice imagery. I like that. A hydra. What can you do? Sign up at battleforthenet.com. If Google Fiber is available in your area, sign up for it and bail on your ISP. The real problem, though, is that too many areas have no competition at all, right? I guess there you could work towards municipal broadband, but that's an uphill battle. There is another angle, though, to the competition. If you could get more competition from internet service providers, to pick Amazon because they're on this list, Amazon could refuse to service one internet service provider and practically put them out of business. Imagine for a second, right? This is impractical. I mean, it's basically impossible currently. But imagine if there was a city where you had Comcast, Verizon, Google Fiber, whatever. Let's say there were 5 options, and Comcast takes an anti-net neutrality stance. Amazon could say, if our website determines that you're on Comcast, the connection won't work. Now, it could be self-sabotage because Amazon doesn't want to lose the customers that are getting on their platform from Comcast. But I'm just sort of proposing that these content providers could have major power over ISPs.
Yeah, I see what you're saying with the example, but of course the telecom company could turn around and say, well, we support local buyers then instead of big conglomerates like
Yes,
Amazon.
they could. It could backfire. It could absolutely backfire, but just an idea. Anyway, battleforthenet.com, check it out. We can be glad to have so many people in the White House and in government and in general so willing to help reporters by providing them information, especially about our new incompetent president, but also about other government activities. What is the military doing? What is the NSA doing, etc.? However, there are lots of journalists that are increasingly afraid of the future and their ability to keep their jobs in the Trump era as leaker investigations are becoming more and more aggressive. Connecting anonymous sources and handling classified information by media outlets is getting riskier every day. Donald Trump, remember, has publicly called for the prosecution of White House leakers. Remember, for example, when he tweeted, "The spotlight has finally been put on the low-life leakers. They will be caught." Trump has previously called for Edward Snowden to be killed. With Trump, of course, there's always a double standard. It's not our focus today, but remember that Donald Trump did inappropriately give classified information to Russian diplomats, one of whom is believed to be by U.S. intelligence to be a Russian spy recruiter named Sergei Kislyak. But let's put that aside for now. We're not talking about the hypocrisy today, although we always could. Donald Trump has even publicly attacked the FBI and compared them to Nazis for allowing leaks, tweeting, quote, "Intelligence agencies should never have allowed this fake news to, quote, leak into the public. One last shot at me. Are we living in Nazi Germany?" And we know that behind closed doors, Donald Trump allegedly asked former FBI Director James Comey to imprison leakers. Maybe we'll learn more about that tomorrow when James Comey testifies in front of the Senate Intel Committee. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has also been really vocal about his opposition to leakers. He's pushing the FBI to be more proactive in investigating them. And New York Times reporter Adam Goldman, who had his phone records secretly obtained by the Justice Department during a leak investigation, said to CNN, quote, "This is a tough operating environment. There is a chill for sure. We'll see how bad it gets." So what's the latest on this war against leakers? Monday, the Justice Department announced its first use under the Trump administration of the Espionage Act. They will be charging intelligence contractor employee leaker Reality Lee Winner for leaking classified NSA documents to the Intercept about Russia hacking voting systems in the United States. A low-level employee like Winner will not have the immunity of elites like former CIA Director David Petraeus did. The Obama administration pressed more Espionage Act charges than all other presidents since 1945 combined. But the Trump administration could surpass that, Pat, because the climate is getting worse. And I've talked about this before. When you talk about going after WikiLeaks for publishing information that they did not illegally obtain, that was handed to them, that is the crossing of a sort of red line when it comes to law enforcement against leakers.
but you can't go after the journalists who just report that information from the leakers themselves. And that's what the Trump administration is trying to do these days.
That's exactly right. And on the condition of anonymity, there's a Washington reporter who said to CNN, quote, "I think that the unknown for us as national security reporters is, what are they willing to do? How far are they willing to go outside the lines to clamp down on things that they don't like?" Another anonymous reporter speaking to CNN said, quote, "We noticed that after we came to the White House with a story they didn't like, they asked us to circle back to our sources before publication to do a final fact check. We don't know what their intentions were, but we were concerned that it was a trick to try to get us to light up the phone networks in the intel community." What's the bigger picture of this? It's part of Donald Trump's efforts to control the media. His claims about fake news, try to keep anything from getting out, and if it does, call it fake or talk about the immorality of the people reporting on it. Government officials have freedom of speech. Talking about embarrassing things that Donald Trump does in the White House without disclosing something that's classified is completely legal, and yet they are creating a climate of fear, and it's translating to reporters, and we should all be worried about it, because right now, maybe you don't care if you're a Trumpist because you're trying to prevent negative news about Donald Trump. But this is a systemic threat to press independence. And even though it might benefit conservatives right now, it won't always.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Donald Trump's credibility has been questioned on a number of issues, but especially when it comes to leaks. Because when it came to Hillary Clinton, he invited them. He said that we love WikiLeaks. He wanted Russian hackers to find the 30,000 missing emails. But now that he's the guy in charge, they only can be bad for him.
I totally agree. And listen, I'm a progressive, right? There's no doubt that this is an opinion program. But both sides do this double standard when it comes to leaks. When the content of the leaks is bad for you, you focus on the fact that there were leaks and going after the leakers. When the content of the leaks is good for you, you just talk about the content of the leaks. You don't care where it came from. Both Democrats and Republicans, different on many issues, similar on many issues. The double standard around content versus sources on leaks is one that we've been very, very critical of. But I'll tell you, over the long run, everybody loses if we lose press freedom. And I understand the concern of many of the reporters and commentators that are out there. I'm on Twitter. Talk to me about this. I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Wendy Knoll. Wendy, thank you so much for supporting our program. We do depend on and need the support of viewers and listeners like Wendy. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership for membership. There is a coupon code, IVoted17, available to you. If you want to use it and get a nice little discount off of membership, feel free. You can also make a pledge of as little as $1 per month. Even $1 a month supports the work we do in a really important way at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. And lastly, if you ever shop on Amazon, davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop will support the work we do with the purchases that you make. All right, we've got a little something special this week on Hatriot Mail. In order to be timely, this week's Hatriot Mail introduction refers to Covfefe, but I don't know which is a funnier pronunciation of Covfefe. So we've got two Hatriot Mail intros this week. Here's the first one. Listen to the pronunciation, then we'll compare to option number 2.
Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because Covfefe.
Okay, that's Covfefe. That's option number 1. Now here's option number 2 for that amazing word. Tell me which one you like better.
Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because Covfefe.
So, Covfefe, Covfefe. I kind of like Covfefe, which is sort of a hybrid of the two.
I wonder if because Donald Trump invented the word that he gets to decide the pronunciation.
Probably. Yeah, that's probably true. Anyway, all right, let me know which one you like better, and we can add it to the regular rotation of Hatriot Mail introductions. Here is this week's Hatriot Mail episode for you.
David Pakman, you are an idiot. David Pakman is a lying Democrat. He's also HIV positive. The quintessential degraded low IQ, low T millennial male. It must be a sad thing to be Davy Pakman and have to wake up every morning, look in the mirror, and realize that you are an absolute nutless cunt.
So can we pause that on the screen somehow? Because I want to look at this. There is one accurate claim made, okay? It says I'm an idiot. That's a matter of opinion. It says I am a Democrat. I have never been a Democrat. It says I'm HIV positive. I am not HIV positive. It says that I have a low IQ. I don't believe that to be true. It says I have low testosterone, which medically speaking, I believe is not accurate. But it says I am a millennial male, and that is true. I am both male and I am squarely in the millennial umbrella.
You're really on this thing. Ever since I accused you of being part of the Gen X generation, right. You just can't get off this topic.
Okay, so that aside, what is this testosterone problem they're referring to? I always find it weird when people make fun of medical problems. Like if you don't have testicles because you've had a medical issue or you've had a testicle removed, you would have a low testosterone issue. Why would that be something to use as an insult, right? I mean, it's a medical condition.
Or you don't even have to have a testicle removed. I mean, you could just have low T levels and have to have injections.
I always find it odd when people think it's funny to make fun of medical problems. Anyway, you can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive. We have a coupon code, Hatriot40, Hatriot 40, which at davidpakman.com/membership will save you 40% off of membership. If that made you chuckle, consider getting a discounted membership. It's a really good way to sort of say F you, I guess, to the Hatriots.
Or Covfefe.
Or Covfefe to the Hatriots. I told you to expect shenanigans from Donald Trump and his administration related to the James Comey hearings that we tomorrow are expecting fired FBI Director James Comey to testify about his conversations with Donald Trump, and it is starting. So we've had the general Twitter hysterics that we predicted, but Donald Trump has now scheduled a speech that will take place. Major coincidence, Pat. This is nothing but a coincidence. During James Comey's testimony tomorrow, Donald Trump will be speaking at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to Majority Conference at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, Thursday, right in the thick of James Comey's blockbuster testimony. I'm sure all media outlets will be covering Trump's speech to the Faith and Freedom Coalition rather than the fired FBI director answering questions about possible crimes committed by the president, right? Damn, I hope not. Fox News might, but I still think most media outlets are going to cover James Comey.
CNN has had a countdown clock for the past few days. I think it was at like 48 hours when I first saw it. Yeah. They're not going to just change their programming schedule now.
Has there ever been Senate Intelligence Panel testimony this anticipated where CNN was running a multi-day countdown clock? I don't remember it if there has been.
I don't know which committee Oliver North testified to, but I think that was one of the ones that was highest rated in American history. Yeah. But you'd have to imagine that this is going to surpass it, whether or not it really deserves to.
Well, I guess we won't know until after the hearing. President Trump has claimed that James Comey told him 3 times that he was not personally under investigation. Other intelligence officials say that Donald Trump asked James Comey to back off of the investigation into now disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. What else are they doing? Well, according to a report from the Associated Press, the White House is planning to undermine James Comey's credibility. White House officials are going to be going after him over the next couple of days for misstatements he made about Democrat Hillary Clinton's emails during his last appearance on Capitol Hill. Earlier, I mentioned the Twitter part. That's going to be a factor. Twitter will be engaged for Trump. Robert Costa, national political reporter for the Washington Post, stated on Twitter, quote, "I'm told by 2 White House sources that President Trump does not plan to put down Twitter on Thursday, may live tweet if he feels the need to respond." How embarrassing is it that the President of the United States, a 70-year-old man, mind you, will be taking time out of what Sean Spicer says will be a full and busy day for Trump tomorrow during the Comey testimony to potentially live tweet testimony about testimony from the guy that he fired. What a time to be alive, isn't it?
It is pretty crazy, but at least he didn't try to block James Comey from testifying, which apparently he would have had the authority to do.
Yeah.
But maybe they just thought that was a bridge too far. I mean, you can fire the guy that's investigating you, but you can't keep him silent and off the record.
Absolutely. And by the way, last time Trump started live tweeting during Comey testimony, during the second part of the testimony, the tweets were brought up and James Comey was able to dispel them as totally false notions. So there's also a risk to live tweeting for Trump. But we'll see what happens with that.
I think Fox News will cover the Comey testimony, especially because they're falling behind in the ratings. I mean, they got to compete, you know?
Maybe so, yeah. The Trump speech at the Faith and Freedom Coalition is not exactly going to drive in the ratings. One of the most vile and disgusting things that one can do when it comes to money is to raise money supposedly to help sick people and then take that money and use it for something else, particularly something for profit or personal enrichment. According to a report released yesterday by Forbes, not exactly a liberal rag, Donald Trump's son, Eric Trump, shifted money supposedly raised to help kids with cancer into one of the Trump businesses. Eric Trump has this golf tournament that he does to raise money for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which is at sort of the forefront of research into pediatric cancer. And as he did this tournament, Eric Trump started charging the fundraiser money for the use of his own golf course, which is a way to direct money raised in donations for cancer research to the Trump family and their for-profit business. This is made even worse by the fact that Eric Trump has always claimed that he is able to hold the event on Trump golf courses free of charge, and that much of the food, drinks, entertainment, and equipment is either comped or paid for by sponsors. According to tax filings obtained by Forbes, the event expenses averaged about $50,000 the first 4 years that Eric Trump did this. In 2011, all of a sudden, the expenses rose to $142,000, and this appears to be because Trump learned that the course was being used without a charge, became upset, and decided to start charging his own fundraiser for use of his own golf course. This is a form of money laundering, right? You're taking nonprofit charity donations that you are inducing by the creation of this event yourself, and then creating profits from them. And we have a quote from the Forbes article, which says, quote, "In effect, though, this maneuver would appear to have more in common with a drug cartel's money laundering operation than a charity's best practices textbook. That $100,000 in outside donations to the Donald J. Trump Foundation," remember, Trump himself didn't give to his own foundation at this time, passed through the Eric Trump Foundation and wound up in the coffers of Donald Trump's private businesses. This is rotten to the core. I mean, really, really low.
Yeah, and we always hear from conservatives that we need less of a welfare state and lower taxes,
right,
so that the rich are able to provide money to the charities that they support.
Of course.
Apparently not. I mean, this is the greediest thing you can do, and at the expense of children with cancer.
This is one of the lowest things you could do, and it's really bad. David Farenthold from the Washington Post has been all over the Trump family's lies about donations and charity and giving and whatever. He's been posting back and forth his communications with Eric Trump, and he first posted that here's the question he sent to Eric Trump after the Forbes story, saying, "Eric, hello, Dave here again from the Washington Post." I'm sure Eric Trump loves getting these emails from David Farenthold. "I just saw that Forbes story saying your charity actually did pay your dad's company for rental of the course in those past years. It surprised me since you had told me categorically and repeatedly last year that he allowed you to use the golf course for free, and that the payments listed on the Eric Trump Foundation's 990s were just pass-throughs to allow you to pay other vendors more easily." So then Eric Trump responded, and again, David Farenthold posted to his Twitter saying, "Contrary to recent reports, at no time did the Trump administration profit in any way from the foundation or any of its activities. While people can disagree on political issues, to infer malicious intent on a charity that has changed so many lives is not only shameful, but is truly disgusting. At the end of the day, the only people who lose are the children of St. Jude and other incredibly worthy causes." David Farenthold's follow-up question, as yet unanswered. Eric, thank you. When you say profit here, I want to be clear about what that means. Were there instances where the Eric Trump Foundation did pay the Trump organization for services rendered, the use of a Trump golf course, etc.? but only paid the cost of those services with no extra profit added on top? Smart question from David Fahrenthold. No answer so far.
Yeah, and I thought that the Trump golf courses and his business overall was so profitable that they can just put aside $142,000. What's that to them?
Absolutely. And it really speaks to the continuing and corroborated story of unaccounted money, supposedly for one charity or another. Remember the unaccounted for millions for veterans? This is the lowest of the low. And you can discuss this with us on our Reddit discussion forum at davidpakman.com/Reddit.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Dr. Adam Gazzaley, who is professor in neurology, physiology, and psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco, founder and executive director of Neuroscape, a translational neuroscience center engaged in technology creation and scientific research, and also author of The Distracted Mind. So, Adam, we're going to touch on a couple different things here, but I guess to begin with, when we talk now, the term technology addiction has become very common sort of in the context of smartphones and the internet. From a medical perspective, what do we mean when we say an addiction to technology?
Well, it's complicated because there's the clinical definition of addiction, which usually applies to things like drug addiction, but has stretched over into behavioral addictions like gambling. Usually what we mean is a almost obsessive compulsion to engage in something that has functional negative consequences on your life. And then there are other aspects that are debated, whether you habituate and have withdrawal. But in general, it's excessive engagement with negative consequences.
Is it more difficult for someone who maybe does not regularly disconnect from their smartphone or the internet to realize that they may have an addiction because they're not even sort of presented with the opportunity to experience withdrawal?
Yeah, I think that we see it in all types of engagement, not just technology in terms of internet, but video games and just even cell phone use in general and texting. If you never are confronted with how something is impacting your life, it is possible that it could go without your awareness.
How prevalent do you believe that technology addiction is right now? And I don't know how we can even, maybe we say in the United States or in OECD countries. I mean, I don't know what data we might have, but how can we assess the prevalence of this issue?
I'm not actually sure the data on that. And it's really hard to find that data because the definitions are so variable. I think what's more important is to just look at the negative effects of it and see how common they are without the labels. Even the terms that we use to label clinical conditions like ADHD and autism are often coming under some challenge in that the labeling process itself is imprecise.
Let's now talk about sort of how this relates to the way human brains are sort of wired or inherently based on our history. In prior times, before we had industrialization, modern technology, sort of a modern Western culture, talk a little bit about the concept of multitasking and the ways in which the brain sort of reacts to moving from one activity to another, and maybe even how that sort of served us in earlier times in human history.
Yeah, so the human brain is it's amazing, obviously. I don't have to convince anyone of that. I would say the most remarkable aspect of the human brain is our goal-setting abilities. These very long, time-delayed, complex, interwoven goals, interwoven with other goals, interwoven with other people's goals. But we have these fundamental limitations in how we enact those goals. We call those the abilities that allow us to do that cognitive control. Our attention abilities, where we direct our limited resources where and when we want them, holding that information in mind for short periods of time, something we call working memory, and then multitasking. And we are capable of doing this in terms of our behavior. But what we see when we look at someone's brain with functional neuroimaging as they attempt to engage in more than one attentionally demanding a task is that the brain network that is activated to do one task disengages and a new network is engaged when you have a secondary task. What we don't see is parallel processing of two tasks that you're engaged in that both demand attention. And so this is just a fundamental limitation of all brains, and we see it across all other animals and humans alike. So where the distracted mind comes in is the conflict between our goals, what we want to do, and what we're actually capable of doing. And although other animals have these same limitations of multitasking, they don't really attempt to engage in the environment in that way, so they don't have that same conflict.
So it sounds sort of like this is both a nature and nurture thing, in the sense that when one might think that they're multitasking, really what they're doing is switching sometimes rapidly from focusing for a short period of time on one task to focusing on another one. There must be some time cost in terms of that switching that takes place, but is there also somewhat of is this a muscle of sorts? In other words, can the sort of brain activity that is encouraged by modern technology, smartphones, et cetera, can it put our brains sort of out of practice of the habit of deeper and longer focus on one task?
Sure. So there was a lot in there. I'll unpack it a little bit. I mean, nature, nurture, of course, almost everything is a combination of our genetics and environmental influences. And this is a very, very nice example of that. The cost that you talk about is what we pay a lot of attention to as scientists and as people that are interested in interference effects, whether it be through distraction or through multitasking.
Or a phone ringing or anything, really.
Exactly. There's the distracted mind for you in real world. What we see, is a cost in both response time, as you described, but also in accuracy. Just the fidelity of information that you're holding in mind is degraded when interrupted, as I just was, by another task and interfering stimulus. The question of plasticity, can we build up this ability? So plasticity goes in both directions. It doesn't really have a morality. It takes you wherever the influence is. It modifies in response. So if you spend your time constantly switching, whether you're having a conversation, you jump on Twitter, you move to your email, you're listening to music, if you engage in that way, then it's very reasonable that other skills that you're not practicing, such as sustained focused attention, will become weaker and need to be retrained.
What are some good, just basic practices for the average person who maybe has a job that depends pretty significantly on being on technology devices, internet, email, etc., and who wants to sort of enact some protections to what can be this natural slide to this regular switching between tasks and scrolling on social media feeds, not ideas that will basically take them out of the world that they're in by virtue of being in modern Western society, but just sort of day-to-day things everybody could do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always like to frame this that I love technology. I'm not a Luddite. I use the same tools that most everyone has, maybe even more. And I don't think this is a black or white issue. I don't think technology is good or bad. It's just that based on a better understanding of where the weakness is and how our brain processes information, you can make an informed decision about how you engage in technology, which is really the core of your question. So I would say if you recognize the limitations and feel them and acknowledge them and how broad they are, how they impact not just your work or your school work, but your social interactions, how they might impact your safety if you're texting and driving. Once you acknowledge them, then you get to make decisions. And one of the decisions that I make is that when I'm engaged in something that really demands a high level of quality, especially if there's time pressure associated with it, I shut off my other technological streams. I quit my email, I shut my other browsers if I'm working on one. I close my door, I turn my phone to airplane mode, as I should have today. And I really work on focusing on that one thing. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, it's not easy to do. If you set an hour to sing task, you may not get through it, especially if you're not used to it. So in that case, I would say that it's most important to set breaks. They might only be 5 minutes long. And it's important that those breaks are not going on social media or even back into your email, because those become these sort of iterative sinkholes that just take you further and further away from getting back to your goal. So the three things that I do are either walk in nature, or even looking at nature. It's shown to have a strong restorative effect. Light physical exercise. It could be a walk again, or push-ups, or just getting moving. And then meditative or mindfulness type practices where you quiet your mind, focus on your breath, and then return to what you're engaged in. And as the days go on of taking these periods of time that you have singular focus, you can go longer and longer without a break until you find that it's actually pretty fun to work on one thing at a time.
We've been speaking about the book, The Distracted Mind. The book's author has been speaking with me, Dr. Adam Gazzaley, professor in neurology, physiology, and psychiatry at UCSF. Thanks so much for talking to us about this.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There are new discussions about Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and people are now talking about a possible resignation. As you might know, Donald Trump's Attorney General has already been caught lying about his meetings and contacts with Russian officials, possibly even perjuring himself. And as a result, again, as you know, this is all old news, Sessions has already recused himself from anything at the Justice Department that relates to Trump and Russia, although it's unclear whether he's actually sticking to that, as evidenced by his name on the letter recommending the firing of James Comey a few weeks ago. It is now getting worse for Jeff Sessions, who hinted at possible resignation. Tensions continue to rise between Sessions and President Trump. And according to a number of reports, that relationship between Trump and Sessions has become so tense that at one point, Jeff Sessions actually suggested, I could resign after all. Now, if you're wondering why things are tense between them, it's apparently because Sessions said that he would recuse himself from Russia-related matters, which the president didn't like and only learned about minutes before Sessions publicly announced it, which of course coincides with everything we know about how the Trump administration handles things, which is Trump's team only finds out about things Trump is doing minutes before or after they happen. And apparently Trump is also finding out about things that his administration is doing minutes before it happens.
Yeah, and Sessions also has been blamed for the fallout over Donald Trump's two failed Muslim majority country travel and refugee bans.
Yes.
Not to defend Jeff Sessions here too much, but that wasn't even his fault.
That actually wasn't. I mean, I'm fine blaming Sessions for things he is actually responsible for, but that really isn't the fault of Jeff Sessions. And sources say that Sessions is just as frustrated as Donald Trump and has offered his resignation. And asked by ABC News if Sessions threatened or offered to resign, a Justice Department spokesperson, Sarah Isgur Flores, declined to comment. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was asked if the president still has confidence in his attorney general. Sean Spicer said, I have not had that discussion with him. That is a red flag, because even when Trump says he does have full confidence in people, days later they end up resigning in some cases. Here, Spicer isn't even willing to say, oh yeah, Trump has confidence in Jeff Sessions.
Yeah, this is getting pretty crazy too, because of course, first Trump fired the acting attorney general, Sally Yates.
Yes.
Then he fired former FBI Director James Comey, and now he's, considering maybe a possible resignation from Jeff Sessions. It's because I think the Justice Department is a quasi-independent organization.
Well, that's the real angle for Trump, right? Which is Trump, if we want to imagine why would Trump want Sessions out, it would be better for Trump to have an attorney general who is not recused from Russian-related matters. And this might seem relatively minor, but it's pretty big, because if the attorney general were to resign not even 5 months into a presidency related to conflict around recusals made necessary by lies related to foreign government collusion. That's major. Added on to the fact that Trump's national security advisor was forced to resign in shame already. And Trump's already known for having trouble finding people to fill roles in his administration. Another high-profile person quitting or being fired is going to make that a lot more difficult. And any replacement attorney general would have to go through a Senate confirmation. This is not exactly the best time for major Senate confirmations for Trump appointees.
Yeah, I get that. But of course, any replacement over Jeff Sessions would be a good replacement, I think. I mean, some cabinet choices we can kind of tolerate, like Nikki Haley or General Mattis, because who's the alternative going to be?
Sure.
Jeff Sessions' record on civil rights, on LGBT rights, on marijuana, it can't get much worse.
I want to float, though, another possible situation, which is, would Jeff Sessions be maybe inclined to resign because his involvement in the Russia scandal is bigger than has already been determined? Maybe there's more than just a few lies about Russian meetings. And is it possible Sessions wants to get out from under this by resigning so that he can turn state's witness and cut a deal?
Or maybe he just doesn't want to be involved in the prosecution. I think that's why we see Jason Chaffetz getting out from Congress now.
Yes, that may be. That may be. We're going to follow what happens with Jeff Sessions. I told you last week that Donald Trump personally lawyered up in the Russia investigation and that Mark Kasowitz is the lawyer who has worked with Trump before and also represents a Russian bank, no joke, who will be representing Donald Trump personally. And he's previously defended Trump in business matters, public relations disputes, in the Trump University stuff, in one of Trump's divorces. But Kasowitz has no experience dealing with Justice Department investigations of this magnitude or congressional investigations. So there's a sort of obvious question here. Why hire Kasowitz for something with which he has no experience? We are getting the answer to that question, and it is coming from Michael Isikoff, now reporting that there were 4 major law firms, prestigious law firms in the country, that were asked to represent Donald Trump in the Russia investigations, and they all refused, according to 5 different sources with knowledge of the matter. The sources say that this was in part because those lawyers believed Donald Trump wouldn't listen to their advice. That is absolutely ridiculous, Pat. That's not the Trump we know. The Trump we know always takes advice from experts in their field, doesn't he?
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. I mean, this is pretty remarkable, too, because you'd think that some of these top law firms in the country would jump at the opportunity to represent the president.
My thoughts exactly.
But apparently they must think that he has no case here, because even if they thought it was an uphill battle, they may still go along with it.
Think about the scenario, right? Michael Cohen, Trump's organizational lawyer, goes to the White House, tells Trump, you need to personally lawyer up since we've got this Justice Department investigation. Multiple congressional committees are investigating possible ties to Russia. So Trump says, fine, I'm going to find an experienced lawyer. The first 4 law firms that he speaks to say no thanks. And Trump ends up with Mark Kasowitz, who knows Trump, has no experience in this field, and has represented a Russian bank. And there are other reasons, I believe, beyond Trump won't listen. One lawyer said that it would kill recruitment for their firm and kill the reputation of it, saying, do I want to be associated with this president and his policies? One of the attorneys who turned down Trump is Ted Olson. Ted Olson, recall, was the Solicitor General under President George W. Bush and one of the major voices in favor of the fight for gay marriage, not willing to represent Trump. One of the attorneys said that another reason they wouldn't represent Trump is that some of their clients, financial institutions, have already been subpoenaed with regard to money laundering as part of the Trump-Russia investigation. That's like a footnote in this story. And it is also major, which is that there are financial institutions, major ones, whose records are being subpoenaed in the Russian investigation. That is something maybe we'll hear more about in the future.
Yeah, it sounds like a hot potato that they don't want to hold on to for too long.
Yeah.
I mean, I think just the fact that Donald Trump is lawyering up doesn't really tell us too much, because there are serious charges that could potentially be brought against him. And even if you're innocent, you want a lawyer. But the fact that no lawyers are really willing to jump on board and are hesitant to do so, that's pretty telling.
Can you imagine being Trump's lawyer and having to deal with the tweets? Like, how on earth do you handle that? And there were also concerns that Trump wouldn't pay the attorney. As we know, Donald Trump has a long history of not paying people who perform services for him. This is almost an alternate universe. Law firms don't want to represent the president of the United States, something that, as Pat pointed out, that would be a great client for a lot of law firms. because they feel that the president, number one, wouldn't listen to their advice, and number two, might never pay them for their services.
And to your tweeting point, I mean, imagine if these lawyers spend months developing a case and then Trump undermines it with one tweet like he did with the travel ban.
I don't blame them for not wanting to represent Trump on this. It actually makes a lot of sense to me. On the bonus show today, housing a prisoner in California now costs more than a year at Harvard, including room, board, books, a laptop, and many nights of drinking out at Boston and Cambridge bars. That is how expensive it is to house a prisoner in California. WikiLeaks is offering $10,000 to get an Intercept reporter fired. And there are some people, and I will tell you who those people are, accusing Donald Trump of violating the First Amendment by blocking people on Twitter. Is there any validity to that? We will talk about it on the bonus show. DavidPakman.com/membership. Sign up today. I voted 17 is the coupon code available to you.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.